So I'll just right click and add a twigs node, drop this in, and just like previously, it doesn't quite generate them in the way we want. So I will increase the frequency to something like 15. And the spread to 1. And we also want to make them start a little earlier, so I'll set this to 0.1. Now, as mentioned previously, the tree becomes pretty heavy, and at this point, if you feel like you are struggling on your PC, maybe it's not handling it too well, you can always skip to the next episode and watch the optimization video, and then come back to this one and work through it with a more optimized version of this tree. So let me jump back to these branches and take a look at something. These branches here. So if we look at the tip of these guys, we can see that there's a hole, right? If we wanted to fix this, we would enable extend parent to any. But what this also does is that it extends any of the breaks that we have at the base of the tree. And unfortunately, we don't have the option yet to extend everything but the breaks. You can see it makes an awful mess down here. So for the moment, we will leave this to none. If we were getting any closer to this tree, we would find a way around this. But for the purposes of this video, what we will do is we will leave the ends of these branches just cut off, and we will come back and add some caps to these guys here. To make this run a little faster, I'll hide these guys, because next I want to look at the tree tip and adding this distinctive shape that we get at the top of the tree. Now I want to do this in 2 steps, so I can add a transition between the tree and the tree tip. And we will do this like we did before when we were looking at adding the split to the tree. So we add a new branch node and reduce the frequency to 0. So add a new branch. I will plug this directly into the trunk and change the frequency up the top here to 0, and make sure that extend parent is set to any. Now we get this more controllable extra part of the tree. Now obviously this isn't what we want, so let's adjust this. I will set the length to something like 5 and almost completely remove the noise. So let me just take this right down and remove the randomization too. There is also some displacement, so we will kill this. And this is much better, much easier to work with. So looking at it compared to the rest of the tree, I don't actually want it to be this long, so let's actually just remove this stuff. Set this to max. Remove this and reduce this to something closer to 0.2 or maybe even 0.1. And adjust the thickness so it gets a little wider still at the top. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add in some more of these branches, and the reason that I did this in several steps is just so I have more control over how it looks at the top of the tree. So I'll just copy and paste these ones for now and drag these on top. We obviously have far too many. So reduce the proportional steps to something like 6 and the per step number to 4. Remove any breaks or knockouts that we have. Let me go to spine and take off all these breaks. We also need to point it up as it's not in the right direction at the moment. We still have all of the stuff that we left on from the previous version. We just reduce the gravity, reduce the randomization, and make sure that these branches are pointing up. We still have too many. Let me just reduce this to 3 seems fine, and increase the length. We perhaps still have too many, so take this down a little further. Yeah, so what I was looking for was this more distinct shape that we can see from a distance. Still a little too high. Cool. And I'll take down the last because it's coming a little too high at the top here. And the start angle, yes, is being affected by the graph. So let me just reduce this. Okay, much better. So the last thing I want to do is add the next tip. So again, I will copy and paste this. And this time connect it to here. And it should give us the final tip. Now this can be quite long. If we look at the reference, it does extend quite high into the sky. So we'll set this to something like 15 and make sure that it comes to a very nice sharp tip. Okay, and again, I just want to add these very distinctive tips. And adjust the length on both of these nodes, so we have a subtle transition rather than it being in and back out. And on this node here, I just want to adjust the start angle as we have a very distinctive straight shape that comes out at the top of these pine trees. So let me just straighten this up a little more here and angle it back up again at the base. Nice. Now obviously we need to add some more branches and twigs here to fill up this shape. So I'll copy and paste these branches. Drag them back on top. And adjust some of the settings to make sure that they are consistent along the length. So I'll change this to interval again. Set the frequency to something like 8. And the count to 4 is fine. Increase the spread some. And reduce the length to something like 0. Again, I want to control the length a bit easier here to make sure they're consistent. So I'm removing all the randomization and removing the percentage of parent because I want these guys to be roughly the same length everywhere. And set this to something like 2 is fine. Looking at these branches here, they still feel a little thick. So let me just reduce the radius on these guys. That's better. And up the radius on these branches. Okay, and perhaps reduce the length. Oh, it disappeared. Probably easier to do it on the node. Nice. And we want to do the same for the branches at the tip here. So I will just copy and paste. And finally add in some twigs for each of these guys. Now, SpeedTree can do some strange things when it comes to organizing our graphs, but we can just move them around so we can better understand how this flow is working its way through these nodes. Let me just switch these guys back on so we can see the whole tree. And at the moment, we are at 11 million tries. We probably have too many, well, we don't. In reality, we have as many as we need. But as 11 million is a little high, we will reduce some for the moment and then further optimize later. But one of the things that we mentioned previously is that we don't want to activate the welding option. If we go to big branches and take a look at the warning option that we have here, it says that it has failed to weld the branches. So that's because we have welding enabled. So I'm just going to go through all of these branches and remove the welding. So that has taken us down to 9.9 million, and now all I want to do is reduce some of the branches, some of the twigs, and thicken them up a little bit as they are getting impossibly thin. Now this is getting a little ugly here, and I think it's just because, again, we have too many branches. So let's just change some of the start angles here and reduce what we have. And I just want to increase the length of these twigs as they are a little short. Okay, so that'll do for now. We have it at 7.7 million. And the last thing we want to do is add in the pines. So it will get a little heavy here, but we will reduce this a bit later. Okay, so right click and add some leaves. Drag and drop it onto the twigs here. And we, of course, need to create our leaf mesh like we did previously. So I will open up the meshes and materials tab that we're hidden. Go to meshes and create a new mesh. So we'll call this pine needle. Edit mesh. Move the anchor to the base and make this a little thinner. add these to both the high, medium and low options. Create a new material. Again, we can call this pine needle. Apply the mesh and drag and drop this onto the geometry. Now it is too big, so we will just reduce the size here to something like 0.25. A bit small, maybe 0.3. And increase the amount to 10. I'll hide these leaves for now. Now, at the moment, we have far too much coverage at the top of this tree. So let me just knock some of these out as we go higher up the tree. So I will add a new point here and drag this up so we can remove some of these branches near the tip. This should work better and also give us a better transition into the top of the tree. Let's just turn these back on to see what it looks like. Okay. It's also a little more manageable. Now let's add the leaves to the final branches at the top. I'll just hide the rest and switch on these twigs here. I'll just copy and paste this leaf mesh and add it to the twigs. It doesn't quite work here. We need to adjust the size and the amount. So we'll wrap this up and reduce the size. Even more. Okay, that works a bit better. The other thing we need to do is also apply these pines to the branches themselves, as this is what happens in nature. And again, we will need a lot more. One thing I want to do is make sure that the mesh is set to double-sided so we can see this a bit easier. There we go. And also set the align to 0.5 so it is more in facing with the direction of the twigs. I want to make sure to do it for this one too when we switch it back on. Okay, so the last thing we're missing is just the needles for these twigs down here. Nice. We did mention previously that we would cap off these broken branches at the bottom, and there is a node for this just called cap. So right click, add geometry and cap. we can drag and drop this onto these big branches here, and you can see it fills in all the holes. Nice. So that's us done. Now, as you have noticed, it is incredibly heavy. So in the next video, we will go ahead and make this more usable and also reduce it even further so we can get a version of this that we can use as a scatter. Thank you.